Now, Adcorp's employment index shows that South Africa's labour productivity has been on a steady decline since 1995. Over the last 18 years, the increases in real wages have not, according to Adcorp, been matched by increases in worker productivity. To look at the competitiveness of South Africa's labour productivity, I'm joined in studio by Jeff Wood, Professor of International Business at Warwick Business School. Jeff, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Of course, the most important question at this time is, what impact does South Africa's declining labour productivity have on investor confidence?
This is a very interesting one. I mean, really the big challenge South Africa's faced is on the back of booming mineral prices, has been obviously currency appreciation, obviously with the dip in the gold price now, decline in the rand, but basically effectively relatively overvalued currency. You've had other areas of the economy being almost crowded out. So in a sense, although the figures have been reasonably good in terms, well, not high enough to create enough jobs in recent years, the real issue has been, as it were, the crowding out and indeed in many areas the decline of non-minerals based industries. If you talk about labour, the key thing with labour is jobs, and if you don't have jobs, now, I mean, how does productivity fit in the picture? I mean, the two issues there. The first is the proportion of good jobs has declined. And so even if you've had wage increases in some areas, you have many marginal jobs hanging around there. The second issue, of course, in South Africa is not so much technical skills, but basic levels of education. Since it's just like, you talk about basic poverty, basic education, literacy. As we know, there are great failings in the school sector, and that ultimately feeds into the productivity puzzle.
Jeff,
so I think the two issues, on the one hand, is demand for labour, the nurturing of the kind of good jobs that allow labour to realise the full potential on the one hand. On the other hand, just the basic skills foundation.
Jeff, of course, if we look at the African continent right now, and a lot of the spotlight on the new discoveries of additional mineral resources, what should African governments listening in on this conversation be learning from the South African example?
It's not just African governments. We can also add the Australian government as well. In the sense, if you look at Australia, many African countries, South Africa, you had a sense of growth on the back of primary commodities, diversification. And of course, for the African viewers out there, most African cities, look at the buildings. Most of the buildings in many African cities were built in the 50s, the 60s, and the early 70s on the back of high commodity prices. And then you had this long period of weak commodity markets, decline. And now, of course, the boom again. But this time it's different. Last time, there was an emphasis on diversification away from minerals. This time, there's growth again, but there doesn't seem to be a serious conversation about diversification. And as I said, it's not just an African problem. Look at Australia. The leaders of both main political parties don't seem to be able to think beyond minerals, even though you've got seemingly the collapse of the Australian motor industry in the pipeline.
Jeff, of course, when you touch on the motor industry, that's a very topical point in South Africa right now, with two current strikes currently underway in that particular sector. But I want to look at the role of trade unions as the key mode of engagement in the labour space. Are we approaching a time when trade unions are being deemed to be redundant and perhaps ineffective to navigate the current challenges that we see in the labour space?
Well, I think of two issues. First of all, unions have an important role to play in actually often saving managers from themselves. Because obviously, if you get locked in a low wage and low skill trajectory, there's always going to be somebody who's going to find cheaper labour somewhere. By forcing firms to pay decent wages, firms then are forced to think of ways of using labour more intelligently. So above all, organised labour can help, actually, as it were, save management from themselves.
Jeff?
A second issue is
Jeff, unfortunately, we are running out of time, and hope that we will be able to pick up this conversation, and particularly an aspect of the conversation that we haven't touched on, and that is the emergence of a global governance structure to look at global governance and labor issues. So we'll definitely be picking that up on Beyond Markets in the future. Of course, that was Jeff Wood, Professor of International Business at Warwick Business School.